to...
Yant she Cynthia Wilson Yuninchia, but ni Nishlon Kinya Ani Bashichin, Tchachitni Dasha Che, Kintlachitni Dashanella, Tebin Desgate Nasha. Hello, my name is Cynthia Wilson. My clans are the Folded Arms people. I'm born for the Towering House clan, and I'm born and raised in Monument Valley, Utah.
Okay. Why did you choose to study nutrition?
I went to school at the University of Utah for my graduate degree in nutrition. I got my Master of Science degree in nutrition, and it's a 2-year program that prepares you to become a registered dietitian. So I chose the field of nutrition because to me it connects me to my traditional roles and values as a Dene woman. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandpa, my maternal grandfather, was a well-known medicine man. He was a healer, a practitioner of the Blessing Way ceremony, and he also did a lot of sand painting. So for me, when I took my first science courses, such as biology, human anatomy, it really connected me to how my grandfather used to teach us about plants and how plants have life and how it is important for our health. It gives us medicine, it cleanses our system, and it really makes up who we are and why we value our connections to our plant relatives. So for me, I chose nutrition because it connected a lot of the Western science that I've been learning in college to the traditional knowledge I've been learning from my family, from my grandfather as a medicine man, and from my grandma and my mother as herbalists. And I think when I think about both areas of knowledge, it's very mind-opening. And you see the whole picture of what holistic health is. So when I think about nutrition, I think about how we as Dene people view food holistically, like who are our plant relatives, what are the gifts and values of food, what are the powers that our plant relatives have, and why is their place that they grow important. And there's a broad scope of the environment that we look at, how the plants are connected to the universe, and why is it important to preserve our ecosystem. So with all that connected, as a Dene woman, is part of our reasoning of connecting to the landscapes where we provide offerings to bring rain, and for asking for the abundance of our medicines. So for me, that is the meaning of nutrition, is our holistic health and well-being, opposed to the nitty-gritty stuff like the vitamins and minerals that are essential to our bodies. And it's really about how we look at our environment in a holistic way, and how we are connected to the universe and to Mother Earth, and how it's our responsibility as the Earth surface people to take care of our plant relatives, our medicines, our livestock, and the four-legged beings. We are all in one circle of life, and to me, that is what it is to be a woman, is nourishing our bodies with the gifts from Mother Earth, and to be able to be caretakers of the plants and four-legged beings. Then we don't have to worry about our own human health, our own nutrition, when we are spiritually connected to our environment. So to me, that's the reason why I chose nutrition, and how it currently relates to my work as the Traditional Foods Program Director. So I launched the Traditional Foods Program. I launched a traditional foods program under a native-led nonprofit called Yuta de Nebuchadnezzar. So with the Traditional Foods Program, we launched it over 5 years, 5 years ago, and it really started. My programming really started by listening at the community level. My work is about listening, planning, organizing, and fundraising based on the priorities at the grassroots level, priorities of the elders of our communities, and addressing the challenges and issues that our communities are directly affected by. So since the beginning of our Traditional Foods Program, we did a lot of elder interviews, farmer outreach throughout the Four Corners region, and also conducting the interviews to hear our stories tied to food and how we are connected to the landscapes and who we truly are as the Earth's surface people and what our roles and responsibilities are in that way. So the way my program has been shaped is by listening to the wisdom from our elders, our knowledge holders, our medicine people, and how we can bring those teachings back into our communities for the younger generation, and why it's important that we bring those teachings back into our communities, because part of it is addressing the issues we face with climate change, is going back to our traditional cooking tools, our farming practices, and restoring our relationship with our livestock and the landscapes, providing our offerings to the rivers that when we cross it, and to our plant relatives, so that we maintain and sustain our holistic health and well-being in that way. So that's part of what my current work is now as the Traditional Foods Program Director, and how I am currently using my degree in nutrition.
Tell us about the Four Corners potato, its importance, its nutrition, and its overall impact on health.
The Four Corners potato is a model example of traditional knowledge. The larger scope of my work is focused on traditional knowledge tied to land management planning, because when we're talking about Bears Ears National Monument, in President Obama's proclamation, he talked about how traditional knowledge is essential for land management planning, whereas the land itself is essential to each of our cultures as indigenous people. And a lot of indigenous people, our cultures are still very much intact. So with my project in restoring or revitalizing the Four Corners potato is part of encouraging Native people to reconnect back to their indigenous food systems on the landscapes, encouraging people to go back and reconnect to our ancestral lands at Bears Ears, where the potatoes are abundant, and why we need to push policies to protect our native plants in that area, and also how it's also about educating our communities that our ancestors have left these potato seeds here for us. They date back 11,000 years, and they're very high in nutritional value. They have double the protein, zinc, and manganese, and it has triple the iron and calcium content than a modern potato. So they're very nutritious, and when I talk to our elders, they talk about how it's a medicine. Our elders talk about how eating the potato raw is used as a source of medicine for stomach issues, stomach problems. And they also talk about the old ways of how they've been used for cooking. They would grind it on a grinding stone to make flour or yeast out of the potatoes, and they also would boil the potatoes with bentonite clay, which is the white clay that we use also as a medicine. We call it glesh, and just eating that glesh raw also helps with stomach issues. So the potato is a medicine within itself, and it's also a superfood. It's good for our diet and our overall health. And part of the initiative with my program is restoring our ancestral foodways, because in my training in nutrition and the Western science, it often pushes away high starchy foods when we're talking about like diabetes education. Like high starchy foods, people often think about potatoes, like the russet potatoes, and here in our communities as Native people, we eat a lot of potatoes, like the russet potatoes, the modern potatoes, and that in clinical settings, if you are talking about like the My Plate method and diabetes education, the dietitian would probably talk about how the potatoes are high in starch. But when you come home and talk to your grandma and you talk about the wild potato, the Four Corners potato, she would talk differently about how the tiny potato brings a lot of benefits and how it actually might be good for your good for managing your diabetes. It probably has impacts on your glycemic index as well. So thinking about both sides, the Western science of it and the traditional knowledge side of the benefits, in talking about indigenous food, even when you talk about the indigenous corn seeds, how they are processed in a certain way to bring out the nutrients. Like when corn are prepared with ash, it brings out more protein in the corn foods. And when you talk about sweet corn from the Western knowledge side of it, then that's also high in starch that would raise your blood sugar levels. But when you talk more about the indigenous food sources with your grandparents and what they know and recognize as corn and potato, then that knowledge would bring about more of the nutrient-dense food and how it's actually beneficial for our overall health. So with my work, I'm hoping to restore those teachings and values and to look at our health benefits in the way our ancestors viewed it, opposed to how we are taught currently within the Western knowledge side of things. They often forget that we have our own teachings, our own cultural foodways that we rely on, not just to consume as food, but how we relate to food and how we utilize the food as a medicine for our overall health. And restoring this tiny potato is all a part of that, and bringing that teaching back into our community. But there are a lot of other native plants and foods out there that we could also bring back into our communities based on the seasons that they grow in and based on the monsoon seasons. And I think it really comes down to how we behave as the Earth's surface people. And the more we put our offerings down, the more we connect to the landscapes, and the more we are present in relating to our plant relatives, then that's the beginning in reconnecting to our overall health and nutrition, our well-being. So that's the way I view the program that I am running and the way I'm using my degree in nutrition, and also why restoring or revitalizing the Four Corners potato is important for our community.
Just, you hit all of them on the list. There's just one question really about food sovereignty. What is food sovereignty and how does it relate to nutrition?
Food sovereignty to me is going back to living our subsistent lifestyle, is learning about foods from our clan mothers, is to learning about food of really connecting to where food comes from and how we relate to food. So when I hear the word food sovereignty, to me is like how are we connecting food to sustain ourselves holistically, and that's really what nutrition is how do we sustain ourselves based on the foods we eat. And when you think about our cultural knowledge, is how do we maintain our health with the medicines that we consume, and how we strengthen our relationships to even our four-legged beings, our protein foods. So the way food sovereignty, when I think about food sovereignty, is how to restore our self-sufficient ways in not only sustaining ourselves but also sustaining the landscapes and sustaining our connections to our plant beings and our four-legged beings, because food is always around us within our environment. We just have to pay more attention to it and relate to our food beings, and also respecting it within the ways we harvest it and within the way we utilize it. In our practice and ways of knowing is honoring food in our ceremonies and in our prayers. And we also have songs about food, and it goes all the way back to our creation stories and how each of these food sources were gifted to us as the earth's surface beings. So when I think about our food systems and nutrition, I think about that broader scope of our connections to food and why it's important for our health and how we behave on this landscape in sustaining ourselves. And it's really dependent on our cultural teachings. It's dependent on maintaining our language, our learning our stories,